Girl disappeared at age 5 to 11 years later. She walks into a police station. The salty breeze carried the laughter of children across Moonlight Bay as 5-year-old Samantha Hale pressed her tiny feet into the warm sand. Her pink bucket dangled from one hand while the other clutched a half-melted ice cream cone that dripped strawberry sweetness down her wrist. The beach stretched endlessly in both directions, a canvas of golden sand meeting the endless blue horizon. "Stay close, sweetheart," her mother's voice called from behind, but it sounded distant now, almost dreamlike as Samantha became mesmerized by something glittering in the sand ahead. She had been building the most magnificent sandcastle with her daddy just moments ago. He'd shown her how to dig the perfect moat, his strong hands guiding her small ones as they carved channels for the incoming tide. Her mother had been reading nearby, occasionally looking up to wave at them with that warm smile that made Samantha feel like the most important person in the world. But then she'd spotted it, a beautiful conch shell, larger than any she'd ever seen, partially buried near the water's edge. It seemed to call to her, its spiral curves catching the afternoon sunlight like a hidden treasure. Without thinking, she'd wandered toward it, her little legs carrying her farther and farther from the familiar voices of her family. The shell was even more beautiful up close, smooth and pearlescent with intricate ridges that felt cool against her palm. She held it to her ear just like Daddy had taught her, listening for the ocean's secret song. But when she lowered it and looked around, her heart began to race. The beach looked different here. The sand was darker, scattered with unfamiliar rocks and seaweed. The happy sounds of her family had vanished, replaced by the endless whisper of waves. She turned in a slow circle, her ice cream cone forgotten as it tumbled to the sand. "Mommy?" she called, her voice small against the vast expanse of ocean. "Daddy?" Only the seagulls answered, their cries sharp and mocking in the salty air. Panic began to bubble in her chest as she realized she couldn't see the colorful beach umbrella that had marked their special spot. Everything looked the same, endless sand, endless water, endless sky. She began to run back the way she thought she'd come, her little legs pumping as tears started to blur her vision. The conch shell remained clutched in her hand, forgotten now in her desperation to find her parents. Sand kicked up behind her as she stumbled, calling out for her mommy and daddy with increasing urgency. "They're not coming back, sweetheart." The voice made her stop so abruptly that she nearly fell. A woman stood a few feet away, seemingly appearing from nowhere. She was tall and thin, with graying brown hair pulled back in a loose ponytail and kind eyes that reminded Samantha of her kindergarten teacher. She wore a simple blue sundress and carried a large woven bag over her shoulder. "What?" Samantha whispered, not understanding. The woman knelt down to Samantha's level, her expression gentle but serious. "I saw what happened, honey. I've been watching from over there." She pointed vaguely down the beach. "Your parents, they left you behind." "No." Samantha shook her head fiercely, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "No, they wouldn't. We're on vacation. Daddy bought me this shell finder thing, and Mommy packed sandwiches, and we're staying at the hotel with the pretty pool." But even as she spoke, doubt crept into her young mind. She'd been gone for what felt like hours. Wouldn't they have found her by now if they were looking? The beach was so big, and she was so small. "I know it's hard to understand," the woman said softly, reaching out to gently brush a tear from Samantha's cheek. "Sometimes grown-ups make decisions that don't make sense to little ones. But don't worry, I'm going to take care of you now. I want my mommy," Samantha sobbed, her small body shaking with the force of her crying. "I know, sweetheart. I know." The woman's voice was soothing, like warm honey. "But sometimes we can't have what we want. Sometimes we have to be brave and start over. My name is Helen, and I promise you'll be safe with me." Something in Helen's voice made Samantha look up through her tears. There was a certainty there, a calmness that made her feel less afraid. This woman seemed so sure, so confident that she knew what was best. And Samantha was tired of being scared and alone on this endless beach. "Will you help me find them?" she asked in a tiny voice. Helen's expression flickered for just a moment, so quickly that Samantha almost missed it. "Oh honey, we're going to do better than that. We're going to start fresh, just you and me. Won't that be nice? A new adventure? Before Samantha could fully process what was happening, Helen was lifting her into her arms with surprising strength. The 5-year-old found herself pressed against the woman's shoulder, breathing in the scent of sunscreen and something floral. Lavender, maybe, like the soap her grandmother used. But my bucket, Samantha protested weakly, looking back at where her pink beach bucket sat abandoned in the sand next to the melted remains of her ice cream cone. We'll get you a new bucket, Helen said, already walking briskly up the beach toward the parking area. A better one. Everything will be better now, you'll see. As they moved farther from the water, Samantha caught a glimpse of something that made her heart leap. In the distance, she could see people running along the shoreline. Even from this far away, she could hear voices calling her name, urgent and desperate. Samantha! Samantha! She tried to turn in Helen's arms, tried to call back to them, but Helen's grip tightened. Don't look back, sweetheart, she whispered urgently in Samantha's ear. That's the past. We're walking toward the future now. But they're calling my name. They're not calling for you, Helen said firmly, her pace quickening as she navigated the wooden walkway that led to the parking lot. You must have heard someone else. Another little girl, maybe. Samantha wanted to argue, wanted to insist that she knew her own name when she heard it, but something in Helen's tone made her stay quiet. She was just a little girl, after all. Adults knew things that children didn't. If Helen said those people weren't calling for her, then maybe they weren't. The parking lot was busy with families loading beach gear into their cars, children running around with sand-covered feet, while parents tried to corral them. Helen moved through it all with purpose, heading straight for a small blue sedan parked near the edge. As Helen buckled her into the back seat, a car seat that seemed to be exactly the right size, as if it had been waiting for her, Samantha pressed her face to the window. She could still see the beach in the distance, still see the tiny figures moving along the shoreline. They seemed to be searching for something. Or someone. Where are we going? She asked as Helen started the engine. Home, Helen replied, adjusting the rearview mirror to look at Samantha with those kind, serious eyes. We're going home, Emily. Emily? Samantha frowned. That's not my name. It is now, Helen said gently, pulling out of the parking space. Emily Carter. That's who you are now. Isn't it a pretty name? As they drove away from Moonlight Bay, Samantha, now Emily, clutched the conch shell in her small hands and watched the beach disappear behind them. She didn't understand what was happening, but Helen seemed so certain, so calm. And she'd promised to take care of her. The last thing she saw before they turned onto the highway was a police car racing toward the beach, its lights flashing red and blue against the golden afternoon sky. But Helen was right, that was the past now. Whatever was happening behind them had nothing to do with Emily Carter, the little girl who was going to start a brand new life with the kind woman who had found her all alone on the beach. The conch shell felt warm in her palm as they drove into the sunset, carrying with it the last whisper of the ocean's song and the echo of voices calling a name that no longer belonged to her. 3 years had passed since Emily Carter first walked through the yellow front door of Helen's cottage in Seahaven, a sleepy coastal town where everyone knew everyone, and secrets were as common as seashells on the shore. The little girl who had once been called Samantha was now 8 years old, with sun-bleached hair and freckles across her nose from countless afternoons helping Helen tend to her garden. Tell me the story again, Emily said one evening as Helen braided her hair before bed. It had become their ritual, this telling and retelling of Emily's true history. Each time Helen told it, the details became more vivid, more real, until Emily could almost remember things that had never happened to her. Helen's fingers worked gently through Emily's tangled locks, her voice taking on that familiar, soothing cadence. Well, you were born to a young couple who weren't ready to be parents. Sarah and Michael Carter, that's where you got your last name, sweetheart. They were barely out of their teens, struggling with money and problems they couldn't handle. Emily nodded solemnly. She'd heard this part many times, but it still made her chest feel tight with a sadness she didn't fully understand. They kept you for almost 3 years, Helen continued, her voice growing softer. They tried their best, but Sarah had gotten mixed up with the wrong people. There were drugs, Emily. Dangerous situations that weren't safe for a little girl. And then they left me? Emily whispered, the same question she asked every time. At a gas station in Nevada. Helen confirmed, her hands never pausing in their gentle work. They bought you a juice box and a bag of chips, told you they'd be right back, and then they drove away. The security cameras caught it all, but by the time the police found you, your parents were long gone. Emily tried to imagine it, herself as a tiny 3-year-old, waiting and waiting for parents who would never return. The image always made her feel hollow inside, like a conch shell with all the ocean drained out of it. But you found me, she said, turning to face Helen with trusting eyes. Helen cupped Emily's face in her weathered hands, her own eyes glistening with what looked like genuine love. I was volunteering at the children's shelter when you arrived. You were so scared, honey. You wouldn't talk to anyone. You just sat in the corner holding that shell you somehow still had, staring out the window like you were waiting for someone to come back for you. This part always confused Emily. She remembered the shell. It sat on her nightstand now, still beautiful but somehow less magical than it had once seemed. But she couldn't remember the shelter, couldn't remember being scared and alone in a strange place. The social workers said you'd been through too much trauma. Helen continued, settling beside Emily on the narrow bed. They thought you might never trust anyone again. But somehow you and I connected. Do you remember the first thing you said to me? Emily shook her head, though she'd heard this part of the story dozens of times. You asked if I was going to leave too. And I promised you that I would never, ever leave you. That's when I knew I had to adopt you, had to give you a real home where you'd always be safe. And we came here. Emily finished, looking around the cozy bedroom that was the only home she could truly remember. We came here, Helen agreed. Just you and me, starting fresh in a place where nobody knew about your past. Where you could just be Emily Carter, my beautiful daughter. The story always ended the same way, with Helen tucking Emily into bed and humming a lullaby that seemed familiar but that Emily couldn't quite place. As Helen's footsteps faded down the hallway, Emily would lie awake staring at the conch shell on her nightstand, trying to remember something, anything, from before Sea Haven. But the memories never came. Instead, there were only fragments, the taste of strawberry ice cream, the feeling of sand between her toes, a man's laugh that seemed to echo from somewhere far away. Helen said these were just dreams mixing with reality, the way a child's mind tried to fill in the gaps when traumatic memories were too painful to keep. During the day, life in Sea Haven was simple and predictable. Helen homeschooled Emily at the kitchen table, teaching her to read with books about brave princesses and magical adventures. They took long walks along the shore, collecting shells and sea glass while Helen pointed out different types of seabirds. Knowledge is power, Emily, Helen would say as they worked through math problems or spelling lists. The more you know, the stronger you become. And strong girls don't need to depend on anyone else. Emily loved these lessons, loved the way Helen's face lit up when she mastered something new. But sometimes she wondered about other children, about what it might be like to have friends her own age or to play on a playground. Aren't there any kids in town I could play with? She asked one afternoon as they walked past the small elementary school. Helen's grip on her hand tightened almost imperceptibly. Those children wouldn't understand you, sweetheart. They've had easy lives, loving families from the very beginning. They wouldn't know how to be kind to someone who's been through what you have. But maybe if we told them. No. Helen's voice was sharp, then immediately softened. I mean, it's better to keep your story private, Emily. Some people might try to take you away from me if they knew about your past. They might think you'd be better off somewhere else, but we know that's not true, don't we? Emily nodded, though something deep inside her chest fluttered with uncertainty. She loved Helen, loved their quiet life by the sea. But sometimes, when she was collecting shells on the beach, she felt like she was searching for something she'd lost, something important that she couldn't quite name. As the years passed and Emily grew from a frightened 8-year-old into a curious preteen, the story of her abandonment became as familiar as her own reflection. Helen told it so often, with such detail and emotion, that Emily never thought to question it. She was Emily Carter, the daughter Helen had chosen and saved. Her past was painful but distant, and her future was here in this cottage by the sea with the woman who had promised never to leave her. The conch shell on her nightstand held the ocean's song, just as it always had. But sometimes, late at night when the waves crashed against the shore, Emily thought she heard something else in its whisper, voices calling a name that sounded almost like her own. At 16, Emily Carter had finally convinced Helen to let her attend Sea Haven High School. After years of homeschooling, the transition to classrooms filled with teenagers her own age had been overwhelming at first. But slowly, she'd found her place among a small group of friends who accepted her quiet nature and didn't ask too many questions about her past. "Come on, Em, it'll be amazing!" Jess bounced excitedly beside Emily's locker, her red curls dancing with each movement. "My cousin lives in Moonlight Bay, and she says the beaches there are incredible. Way better than our boring old shore." Emily's heart skipped at the name, though she couldn't say why. "Moonlight Bay? It's about 3 hours south," added Marcus, leaning against the adjacent locker. "Perfect for a weekend trip. My brother can drive us in his van." "I don't know." Emily hesitated, twirling her combination lock nervously. "Helen doesn't really like it when I go too far from home." "You're 16, not 6. Jess laughed, then immediately looked apologetic. "Sorry, I didn't mean. I know your mom's protective because of what happened when you were little." Emily had shared bits of her story with her closest friends: the abandonment, the adoption, the reason Helen was so cautious about letting her venture into the world. They thought they understood, but Emily wasn't sure she understood it herself anymore. "She'll say no," Emily said finally. "Then don't ask," Marcus suggested with a mischievous grin. "Tell her you're staying at Jess's house for the weekend." Which is technically true, just not which house. That Friday afternoon, Emily found herself cramped in the back of a rusty van with 5 other teenagers, watching the familiar coastline of her hometown disappear behind them. Her stomach churned with a mixture of excitement and guilt, but something deeper than anticipation was pulling her forward, a feeling she couldn't name. Moonlight Bay was everything Jess had promised and more. The beach stretched for miles in both directions, dotted with families and couples enjoying the perfect autumn weather. The sand was finer here, almost golden, and the water sparkled like scattered diamonds under the afternoon sun. "This place is paradise," Jess sighed, spreading her towel near a cluster of rocks that formed a natural windbreak. But Emily barely heard her. She stood at the water's edge, her bare toes digging into the wet sand, and felt something electric run through her body. This place was familiar in a way that went beyond déjà vu. It was like coming home to somewhere she'd never been. "You okay, Em?" Marcus appeared beside her, concern creasing his features. "Yeah, I just..." She shook her head, trying to clear the strange feeling. "It's beautiful here." They spent the afternoon swimming and playing volleyball, but Emily found herself drawn away from the group again and again. She wandered along the shoreline, picking up shells and studying the landscape with an intensity that surprised even her. Everything felt significant: the way the rocks jutted out of the sand, the angle of the sun as it began its descent, even the sound the waves made as they crashed against the shore. As evening approached and the beach began to empty, Emily walked farther from her friends than she'd intended. She found herself near a section of beach that seemed almost deserted, where larger rocks created small, private coves. The setting sun painted everything in shades of gold and pink, and for a moment, Emily felt like she was living inside a memory. She was examining a particularly beautiful piece of sea glass when she heard it, a man's voice, clear and desperate, cutting through the sound of the waves. "Samantha!" Emily froze, the sea glass slipping from her fingers. The voice came again, closer now, filled with anguish and hope. "Samantha, please! Where are you?" Something exploded in Emily's mind, not a memory, exactly, but a feeling so powerful it nearly knocked her to her knees. She saw flashes, strong hands helping her build a sandcastle, a man's laugh warm and familiar, arms lifting her high into the air while she squealed with delight. "Daddy?" The word escaped her lips before she could stop it. She spun around, her heart pounding, but the beach behind her was empty except for a lone figure walking a dog in the far distance. The man wasn't calling for her, couldn't be calling for her. Her name was Emily Carter, and her father had abandoned her at a gas station when she was 3 years old. But the feeling didn't fade. If anything, it grew stronger, washing over her in waves that matched the rhythm of the tide. She remembered this place, not just the look of it, but the feel of it. The way the sand squeezed between her toes, the particular smell of salt and seaweed, the sound of seagulls crying overhead. And she remembered being happy here. Not just content or peaceful, but radiantly, completely happy in a way she hadn't felt since when? She couldn't remember ever feeling that kind of pure joy in Sea Haven. "Emily! There you are!" Jess's voice broke through her reverie. "We've been looking everywhere for you. Time to head back." Emily nodded numbly, following her friends back to the van. But as they drove away from Moonlight Bay, she pressed her face to the window and watched the beach disappear with a sense of loss so profound it made her chest ache. That night, lying in Jess's cousin's guest room, Emily stared at the ceiling and tried to make sense of what had happened. The rational part of her mind insisted that it had been nothing more than an overactive imagination, triggered by being in a new place. Helen had always said that Emily had a tendency to romanticize things, to create elaborate fantasies to fill in the gaps in her memory. But the feeling lingered. And more than the feeling, there was something else, a certainty that settled deep in her bones like an echo she'd been waiting her whole life to hear. She had been to Moonlight Bay before. She was sure of it. And somehow, the name, Samantha, belonged to her in a way that Emily never quite had. When she finally drifted off to sleep, her dreams were filled with the sound of waves and a man's voice calling her home. Emily returned from Moonlight Bay carrying more than just sand in her shoes and salt in her hair. The memory of that voice calling, Samantha, had lodged itself deep in her chest, growing stronger rather than fading as the days passed. She found herself distracted during classes, staring out windows and searching her mind for fragments of something that felt real but impossible. "You've been quiet since your trip," Helen observed one evening as they washed dishes together. It was one of their simple routines, Helen washing while Emily dried, the kitchen window open to let in the sound of waves from their own familiar shore. "Just tired, I guess," Emily replied, but her voice sounded distant even to her own ears. Helen's hands stilled in the soapy water. After 16 years together, she knew Emily's moods better than anyone. "Did something happen in Moonlight Bay? Did your friends?" "No, they were fine." Emily set down the plate she'd been drying and turned to face Helen directly. "Mom, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." Something flickered across Helen's weathered features, so quickly that Emily almost missed it. Fear? Guilt? But then Helen's expression smoothed back into its usual calm concern. "Of course, sweetheart. What is it? Have I ever been to Moonlight Bay before?" The silence stretched between them like a held breath. Helen's hands remained submerged in the dishwater, and Emily could see the tension in her shoulders even beneath her loose cardigan. "What kind of question is that?" Helen finally asked, her voice carefully neutral. "You know your history, Emily. We've talked about it countless times." "That's not an answer." Emily's voice was steadier than she felt. "I felt like I knew that place. Really knew it. Not just from pictures or stories, but like I'd been there before. Like I'd been happy there." Helen pulled her hands from the water and dried them slowly on a dish towel, buying time. "Sometimes when we visit new places, our minds play tricks on us. It's called déjà vu. You're probably thinking of one of the books we've read together, or maybe a movie. I heard someone call my name. Emily, that's impossible." "Not Emily." The words tumbled out before she could stop them. "Someone called out Samantha, and I turned around. I turned around like it was my name." Helen's face went pale, the dish towel falling from her trembling hands. That's just coincidence. There are lots of girls named Samantha." "Then why did it feel so familiar? Why did I remember someone lifting me up, spinning me around on that exact beach?" Why did I remember being loved in a way that felt different from anything I can remember from my real life? Your real life is here. Helen's voice cracked with an emotion Emily had never heard before. With me. Everything before was trauma and abandonment and pain. Your mind is protecting you by blocking those memories, creating fantasies to replace them. But even as Helen spoke, Emily could see the cracks forming in her composure. After 16 years of steady, confident answers, Helen was floundering. I'm going upstairs, Emily said quietly. She needed space to think, to process the way Helen had reacted to the name Samantha. In her room, Emily sat cross-legged on her bed and stared at the conch shell on her nightstand. For the first time in years, she picked it up and held it close, studying every curve and ridge. It was beautiful, but also somehow precious in a way that went beyond its natural beauty. Like a treasure that had been chosen specifically for her. Acting on impulse, she climbed onto her desk chair and reached for the top shelf of her closet, an area Helen always cleaned for her because she couldn't reach properly. Her fingers brushed against boxes of old clothes and books until they found something unexpected, a small wooden box pushed far into the back corner. Emily's heart raced as she pulled it down. It was locked, but the wood was old and the mechanism simple. After a few minutes of gentle pressure, it clicked open. Inside were things that didn't belong to Emily Carter's carefully constructed history. A hospital bracelet that read, "Baby Girl Hail." A tiny gold bracelet with "Samantha" engraved in script letters. And underneath it all, a photograph that made Emily's breath catch in her throat. The picture showed a toddler, herself, unmistakably, sitting on a beach blanket between a man and woman who were clearly her parents. The man had Emily's same dark hair and bright smile, while the woman shared her nose and the shape of her eyes. They looked radiantly happy, the picture of a perfect family vacation. These weren't the faces of people who would abandon their child at a gas station. These were the faces of parents who adored their daughter. Emily turned the photo over with shaking hands. In Helen's careful handwriting were the words, "Samantha Hale, age 2, Moonlight Bay." The truth hit her like a physical blow. Helen had lied. About everything. Her name, her past, her parents, all of it had been fabricated. And Helen had kept evidence of the truth locked away like a guilty secret. Footsteps creaked on the stairs, and Emily quickly shoved everything back into the box, her mind racing. She managed to get the box back onto the shelf just as Helen knocked on her door. "Emily? Honey, I think we should talk more about what happened at the beach. I want to help you work through these confusing feelings." "I'm fine, Mom," Emily called back, proud that her voice sounded steady. "I'm just going to do some homework and go to bed early." "All right, sweetheart. But remember, I'm here if you need me. I'll always be here for you." As Helen's footsteps retreated down the hallway, Emily pulled the conch shell close to her chest and finally understood why it had always felt so significant. It wasn't just a pretty shell she'd found on a beach. It was the last real thing she had from her true life, from the family who had loved her enough to take her on vacation to a magical place called Moonlight Bay. Her name was Samantha Hale, and somewhere out there, people were probably still looking for her. The question now was what she was going to do about it. For 3 days, Emily carried the weight of her discovery like a stone in her chest. She went through the motions of normal life, attending classes, eating dinner with Helen, pretending to do homework, while the photograph burned like a secret fire in her backpack. Every time Helen smiled at her or called her "sweetheart," Emily felt the lie growing larger between them. Helen seemed to sense something had shifted. She was more attentive than usual, bringing Emily her favorite snacks and suggesting they watch old movies together. But her eyes held a wariness that hadn't been there before, and Emily caught her watching with an intensity that made her skin crawl. "I was thinking we could take a trip," Helen said over breakfast on Tuesday morning. "Maybe visit that lighthouse up the coast you've always wanted to see. We could leave this weekend, make it a little adventure." Emily's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "Why now? Do I need a reason to want to spend time with my daughter?" Helen's laugh sounded forced. "You've been working so hard in school, and I thought you might need a break from all the stress." But Emily could read the subtext now. Helen was trying to distract her, to pull her away from whatever questions were brewing. The realization that Helen had been manipulating her for years, not just with lies, but with carefully orchestrated emotions and experiences, made Emily feel sick. "I have a history test on Monday," Emily said carefully. "Maybe we could go another time." Helen's smile faltered for just a moment. "Of course, sweetheart. School comes first." That afternoon, Emily sat in her last class of the day, staring at the photograph hidden inside her history textbook. The faces of her real parents smiled up at her, David and Margaret Hale, according to the names written on the back. They looked so young, so happy, so completely devoted to the little girl between them. She thought about the man's voice calling, "Samantha," on the beach at Moonlight Bay. Had that been her father, still searching for her after all these years? The possibility made her chest tight with hope and terror in equal measure. When the final bell rang, Emily made a decision that felt like stepping off a cliff. Instead of catching the bus home to Sea Haven, she walked the 6 blocks to the local police station. The building was small and unremarkable, wedged between a coffee shop and a used bookstore. Emily had passed it hundreds of times but never really noticed it before. Now it loomed before her like a gateway to a different world. The lobby smelled like coffee and floor wax, with fluorescent lights that hummed overhead. A middle-aged woman with kind eyes sat behind a reception desk, looking up as Emily approached. "Can I help you, honey?" Emily's mouth felt dry as sandpaper. I think I might be a missing person." The woman's eyebrows shot up. "Excuse me? I think I was reported missing. A long time ago." Emily's hands shook as she pulled the photograph from her backpack. "This is me when I was little, but the name on the back isn't the name I've been using." The receptionist studied the photo, her expression growing more serious. "How long ago are we talking about?" 11 years. I was 5. "Honey, I think you need to speak with Detective Morrison. Can you wait here for just a minute?" Emily nodded, sinking into one of the plastic chairs that lined the wall. The minutes felt like hours as she waited, her heart hammering against her ribs. Part of her wanted to run, to pretend this conversation had never happened and return to the simple life she'd known. But she couldn't unknow what she'd learned. The truth was a door that only opened one way. Detective Morrison turned out to be a tall black woman with graying hair and sharp, intelligent eyes. She introduced herself and led Emily into a small interview room that smelled like stale coffee and institutional soap. "So," Detective Morrison said, settling across from Emily at a scarred wooden table, "tell me why you think you might be a missing person." Emily took a shaky breath and told her story: the beach trip to Moonlight Bay, the feeling of recognition, the voice calling, "Samantha," and finally, the hidden box and the photograph. Detective Morrison listened without interruption, occasionally making notes, but mostly just watching Emily's face with those keen eyes. When Emily finished, Detective Morrison was quiet for a long moment. "This is a very serious accusation you're making. You understand that, right? If what you're saying is true, it means the woman who raised you committed kidnapping." "I know." Emily's voice was barely a whisper. "But I also know that this picture shows my real parents, and my real name is Samantha Hale, not Emily Carter." Detective Morrison nodded slowly. "I'm going to run your photo through our missing persons database. If there's a match, we'll know within minutes. But Emily, or Samantha, I need you to understand that this will change everything. Once we start down this path, there's no going back. Are you sure you want to do this?" Emily thought about Helen, probably at home making dinner and worrying about why she was late. Helen, who had sung her lullabies and taught her to read and held her when she had nightmares. Helen, who had also stolen her from her real family and built her entire life on a lie. "Yes," Emily said, her voice growing stronger. "I want to know the truth." Detective Morrison typed something into her computer, then used a scanner to upload the photograph. The seconds ticked by with agonizing slowness as the system searched through thousands of missing persons reports. Then the computer chimed softly, and Detective Morrison's expression changed completely. "Oh my God!" she breathed, staring at the screen. Samantha Hale. Missing from Moonlight Bay, California, 11 years ago. Last seen on the beach with her family during a vacation. Emily's vision blurred with tears as Detective Morrison turned the monitor toward her. There, on the screen, was a missing person poster with her 5-year-old face smiling back at her. Below the photo were the words that made her heart break and soar simultaneously. If you have any information about Samantha Hale, please contact the Moonlight Bay Police Department. Her family is still searching for her. Still searching. After 11 years, they were still searching for her. We need to make some phone calls, Detective Morrison said gently. Are you ready for this, Samantha? For the first time in 11 years, Emily smiled at the sound of her real name. The reunion happened faster than Samantha could have imagined. Within hours of Detective Morrison's call to the Moonlight Bay Police Department, David and Margaret Hale were on a plane to Sea Haven. Samantha spent those hours in a strange limbo between her old life and her new reality, staying at the police station while social workers made arrangements and investigators began the careful process of unraveling 11 years of deception. Helen had been arrested at the cottage, Detective Morrison explained gently. The woman who had raised Samantha sat in a holding cell just down the hall, but Samantha couldn't bring herself to ask for details. The betrayal was still too raw, too complicated by years of genuine love and care. She saved your life, Helen had told the detectives, according to Morrison. She was convinced your biological parents were unfit, that you'd been neglected or worse. She truly believed she was rescuing you. The explanation didn't erase the crime, but it helped Samantha understand why Helen's love had always felt real even when everything else was a lie. Helen had loved her, just not enough to let her go. When David and Margaret Hale walked through the police station doors, Samantha's carefully maintained composure finally cracked. Her father looked exactly like the man in her recovered memories. Older now, with silver threading through his dark hair and lines around his eyes that spoke of years of worry and loss. Her mother was smaller than Samantha remembered, more fragile, but her eyes held the same warmth that had haunted Samantha's dreams. They approached her slowly, as if she might disappear if they moved too quickly. For a moment, they all stood frozen, 3 people trying to bridge an impossible gap of time and pain. Samantha? David's voice broke on her name, the same voice that had called to her across the beach at Moonlight Bay. Dad? The word came out as a whisper, but it unlocked something deep inside her chest. Suddenly she was running into their arms, and they were holding her so tightly she could barely breathe, and everyone was crying and laughing at the same time. We never stopped looking, Margaret whispered into Samantha's hair. Not for a single day. We never stopped believing we'd find you. The weeks that followed were a careful dance of rediscovery and healing. Samantha moved into the guest room of her parents' house in Moonlight Bay, the same house she'd lived in for the first 5 years of her life. Her old bedroom had been preserved like a shrine, filled with toys and books she dimly remembered but couldn't quite connect to her current self. We kept hoping, her mother explained one afternoon as they sat together on the beach where it all began. Every birthday, every Christmas, we'd add something new to your room. It helped us feel like you were still growing up with us, even when you weren't. The adjustment was harder than Samantha had expected. She loved her parents. That recognition had been immediate and undeniable. But she was no longer the 5-year-old who had been taken from them. She was 16 now, shaped by Helen's quiet wisdom and careful protection. She liked different foods, had developed different interests, carried herself differently than she might have if she'd grown up as Samantha Hale. It's like learning to love a stranger who used to be your daughter, David admitted during one of their family therapy sessions. But also like loving the same person we always have, just older. Changed. The most difficult part was reconciling her feelings about Helen. During visiting hours at the county jail, Samantha sat across from the woman who had raised her and struggled to find words for emotions too complex for language. I'm sorry, Helen said, her hands shaking as she reached across the table. I know that's not enough, but I'm so sorry, Emily, Samantha. I thought I was saving you. I thought they'd hurt you. They never hurt me. Samantha replied quietly. They loved me. They'd been looking for me every day for 11 years. Helen's face crumpled. I know that now. I've always known deep down. But I loved you so much, and I was so afraid of losing you again. I convinced myself that my love was enough to make it right. It wasn't enough, Samantha said, but her voice held compassion rather than anger. Love isn't enough if it's built on lies. As autumn turned to winter, Samantha found her rhythm in her new old life. She enrolled at Moonlight Bay High School, where teachers and students whispered about the girl who came back. She made tentative friendships and slowly began to trust that this life was real, that her parents wouldn't disappear if she looked away for too long. The conch shell from her childhood sat on her new nightstand, a bridge between the girl she'd been and the person she was becoming. Sometimes she held it to her ear and listened for the ocean's song, but now she also heard something else. The voices of people who had never stopped calling her name, never stopped hoping she'd find her way home. Helen was sentenced to 12 years in prison, but she would be eligible for parole in 8. Samantha visited her monthly, not because she had to, but because Helen was still part of her story. Love, she was learning, didn't disappear just because it had been tangled up with deception. On a warm spring afternoon, nearly a year after walking into that police station, Samantha sat on the beach at Moonlight Bay with her parents. Her father was teaching her to build sandcastles again, just like he had when she was 5, while her mother read nearby with the same peaceful expression Samantha remembered from her recovered memories. Do you ever regret it? Margaret asked suddenly. Coming forward? Changing everything? Samantha considered the question seriously. She missed Helen sometimes, missed the quiet simplicity of their life in Sea Haven. But she looked at her parents, really looked at them, and saw how her return had healed something broken in both of them. No, she said finally, watching a seagull dive for fish in the sparkling water. I spent 11 years living someone else's idea of who I should be. Now I get to figure out who I actually am. She picked up a handful of sand and let it run through her fingers, thinking about second chances and the courage it took to choose truth over comfort. Her name was Samantha Hale, and for the first time in her life, that felt exactly right. The ocean sang its eternal song, and this time, she knew all the words.